Hmm. That Thursday morning, when I drove 90 minutes through Georgia fog to reach Greystone Regional Medical Center, I told myself I was doing the right thing. My nephew was lying in a trauma bay on a ventilator, and his stepfather had called me the night before, voice thick with what I'd taken for grief, telling me the doctors needed a family decision by morning. I was the one holding his medical power of attorney. He'd given it to me 4 years ago, sitting at my kitchen table telling me he trusted me more than anyone alive. So I drove through the dark with my hands tight on the wheel and my heart already breaking, ready to let him go if that was what the medicine said. I never expected that before I could even uncap the pen. A young woman in a hospital ID badge would step directly into my path and say, "Please don't sign anything yet. I know this sounds insane, but I need you to come with me right now." She looked terrified, not nervous, terrified, not nervous, terrified. And 31 years working as a child protective services investigator before I retired had taught me the difference. Have you ever had a moment where every reasonable voice in your head told you one thing and something deeper, something that lives below thought, told you the opposite? I'm asking because what I did next, choosing the scared young woman over the stack of papers on the table, is the only reason my nephew is alive today. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever faced a choice like that. And if this story hits close to home, please hit that like button and subscribe to Twisted QVX Stories. Every share might reach someone who needs to hear it. Let me back up 3 days. My nephew, I'll call him by his name, Danny, was 31 years old and the closest thing to a son I'd ever had. His father, my younger brother Marcus, died when Danny was 11. A heart attack that took him on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, with no warning and no goodbye. I'd stepped in as much as an aunt could. I'd been at every graduation, driven 4 hours to watch him defend his master's thesis, and when his mother remarried a man named Glenn Portfield 2 years after Marcus died, I'd tried hard to like Glenn for Danny's sake. I never quite managed it. There was something about the way Glenn looked at Danny, not with warmth, not even with indifference, but with a kind of patient, calculating attention that made the hair on my arms stand up. Danny's father had left him a trust. Not a fortune by certain standards, but substantial $2.3 million set to release in full on Danny's 32nd birthday. That birthday was 11 weeks away when I got the phone call. Glenn's voice was measured when he told me. He said Danny had been driving home from a camping trip when he apparently lost control of his truck on a rain-slick stretch of Route 9, went through a guardrail, and rolled down a 40-foot embankment. A passing driver had found him and called 911. By the time the ambulance reached Greystone Regional, Danny was in a coma with a traumatic brain injury, 2 broken ribs, and a ruptured spleen that the surgeons had already repaired. "He's not going to make it," Glenn said. "The neurologist says the brain damage is catastrophic. He's on a ventilator, Eleanor. He's gone in every way that matters. As his power of attorney, you'll need to come authorize withdrawal of life support. I've already spoken to the hospital and they're expecting you first thing Thursday." I didn't sleep that night. Danny had been healthy, careful, and experienced driver who'd made that camping run a dozen times. I kept telling myself accidents happen to careful people every day. I kept telling myself grief was making me suspicious of a man who'd done nothing but lose his stepson. I told myself all the reasonable things, and none of them made the dread in my chest any lighter. I arrived at Greystone Regional at 8:15 in the morning. Glenn was already there in the family waiting area, sitting beside a woman I'd never seen before, younger than him by 15 years at least, wearing a blazer that looked too put together for a hospital waiting room. Glenn introduced her as his colleague from work, a project manager named Sylvia who'd offered to drive him since he was too upset to manage it himself. I shook her hand and tried to read nothing into the half-second too long that he held it when he helped her off with her coat. The attending neurologist, a Dr. Hafner, met with us briefly. He spoke in the careful, flattened language of someone delivering a prognosis they had delivered many times before. Severe diffuse axonal injury. Absent brainstem reflexes. Prognosis is extremely poor. His eyes, I noticed, didn't quite meet mine when he said it. They drifted to Glenn standing at my shoulder and then away again, the way a person looks when they're aware of being observed. Glenn put a folder of paperwork in my hands before I'd even had my second cup of hospital coffee. His hands, I noticed, were not shaking. He said the doctors recommended we not extend Danny's suffering. He said Danny had told him once, just conversationally, Glenn was careful to say that he wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines. He said the trust assets would remain in holding until probate resolved the estate and that these things could take months, so it was really best for everyone to move forward cleanly. That word, cleanly, sat wrong in me. I didn't say anything. We walked together to Danny's room in the neuro ICU. My nephew lay in the bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. All the vivid energy I associated with him compressed into stillness. I stood at the rail and held his hand and told him silently that I was there. Glenn set the authorization forms on the bedside tray table and placed a pen on top of them with a small definitive click, like a period at the end of a sentence. I reached for the pen. "Excuse me." The voice came from the doorway. A young woman, maybe late 20s, with close-cut natural hair and an ID badge that read Hospital Social Worker, Patient Advocacy. She was looking directly at me, not at Glenn, and her expression was doing something complicated that it took me a moment to identify as controlled panic. "Are you Ms. Eleanor Voss? Danny Mercer's aunt?" "I am." "I'm so sorry to interrupt." She wasn't looking at Glenn at all, which I registered. "I have some paperwork from our patient advocacy office that needs your signature before the authorization can proceed. Hospital protocol. It will only take a few minutes. Could you come with me to the consultation room just down the hall?" Glenn stepped forward. "I don't think that's necessary." "Eleanor is here too?" "It's a legal requirement," the young woman said, and her voice held steady even though her jaw was tight. "For POA authorizations in end-of-life cases, our office has to complete an independent family consultation first. It takes 10 minutes. I apologize for the timing." I watched Glenn's face. Something passed through it. Fast, controlled, gone. That I recognized from 31 years of interviewing people who were hiding things. Not grief. Calculation. 10 minutes, I said. "That's fine." The young woman, her badge said Criminal Co4, walked quickly, and I matched her pace. She pushed open the door of a small consultation room at the end of the corridor, glanced back down the hall, and locked the door behind us. Then she turned to me, and I saw that her hands were shaking. "There's no paperwork," she said. "I'm sorry, I made that up. But Ms. Voss? I've been Danny's assigned patient advocate for the last 2 days, and I have to tell you what I've seen. Because if you sign those forms, I believe your nephew is going to die not from his injuries, but because someone wants him dead." The room was very quiet. "Talk to me," I said. She had started her involvement the morning after Danny was admitted. She explained. Standard protocol. Any long-term neural ICU patient got a patient advocate assigned. She'd reviewed his chart, checked in on him, introduced herself to the family. What she noticed first was small. Danny's reflexes during her initial visit, she'd done a routine neurological check while Glenn was getting coffee, included a withdrawal response when she applied pressure to his fingernail bed, slight. But there, she'd flagged it to the nurse on shift, who told her to note it in the chart and that Dr. Hafner had already done a full assessment. She'd looked at Dr. Hafner's assessment. It documented no reflexive responses. She'd done her own sternal rub test the following afternoon, again when Glenn had stepped out. Danny grimaced. A small tightening of the muscles around his eyes and mouth, but unmistakable to anyone who was watching for it. She'd gone back to the chart. Danny's sedation levels were listed at a standard maintenance dose. But in the nursing notes, not the attending notes, the nursing notes, which she'd learned to read carefully in her 3 years of advocacy work, there were 2 entries over the past 48 hours noting that an IV adjustment had been made and attributed to attending's verbal orders. No countersignature. No documentation in Hafner's notes. She'd gone to her supervisor. Her supervisor told her she was new, that she was seeing patterns that weren't there, that Dr. Hafner was one of the most respected neurologists on staff, and that she should not make accusations she couldn't support. That morning, she'd arrived early and found something she hadn't been looking for. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. She'd taken it at 6:47 that morning, timestamp intact. It showed the hallway outside Danny's room, visible through the narrow window in the consultation room door across from his. Glenn Portfield was in the frame, standing close to Dr. Ver. Hafner, and Glenn was handing the doctor an envelope. Not a document envelope, a personal envelope, thick, the kind that holds cash. Dr. Hafner put it in his inside jacket pocket without looking at it, the way someone receives something familiar. I looked at the photo for a long time. Why would Glenn want Danny dead? Camille asked. She was watching me carefully. Money, I said. There's a trust. 2.3 million. Releases in 11 weeks when Danny turns 32. Glenn was named contingent trustee years ago when Danny was a minor. If Danny dies before the distribution, the trust reverts to the estate. Danny's mother passed last year. Glenn was still married to her when she died. Depending on how the estate documents read, he could have a claim. Camille closed her eyes briefly. I thought it had to be something like that. Who is Sylvia? I asked. The woman he brought? I don't know her. But I've seen her here every day since Danny was admitted. She doesn't interact with staff. She just stays close to Glenn. I sat with that for a moment. Then I did what 31 years of fieldwork had trained me to do. I stopped feeling and started thinking. Here's what we're gonna do, I said. First, is there a neurologist on this floor not on Dr. Hafner's service? Someone with no connection to him? Camille nodded immediately. Dr. Durst Quates. Renata Shaw. She's a department chief. She's not Hafner's direct supervisor, but she outranks him. She's known for being exact. She doesn't take shortcuts. Get her to do an independent neurological assessment of Danny right now without telling Hafner. Tell her you have documented concerns about sedation levels and conflicting chart entries. Show her the nursing notes. You're a patient advocate. That's exactly your job. I can do that. Second, I was already thinking ahead. That photograph you took. Who else has it? Just me. Send it to yourself on 2 different email addresses right now and text it to my phone. I gave her my number. Evidence disappears. We don't let that happen. Third, the envelope Glenn gave Hafner. We can't prove the contents without law enforcement, but we can get law enforcement here faster if we have something more solid. Does this hospital have security footage coverage of the hallways? Yes. The security office keeps rolling 48-hour footage from all patient care areas. Does it cover the corridor outside Danny's room? Yes, I think so. I'd have to check with the security director. Do that. Tell him you're filing a formal patient safety incident report and you need to preserve footage from the last 72 hours before it rolls over. That's standard protocol and he has to honor it. Don't tell him why yet, just preserve it. Camille was writing on a note pad, fast. What are you going to do? I'm going to go back to that room, I said, and I'm going to buy us time. She looked at me. Are you sure? I spent 3 decades sitting across tables from people who were hurting children and smiling about it, I said. I know how to stay in a room with a man like Glenn Portfield. I took 3 slow breaths in the hallway before I walked back in. Glenn and Sylvia were both standing now, and when I entered, their heads turned toward me in unison with an attentiveness that felt rehearsed. Sorry about that, I said, moving to my usual chair beside Danny's bed. Apparently, they have a new family consultation requirement, paperwork. I picked up the authorization forms and looked at them as though I was reading carefully, though my eyes weren't taking in a word. I just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign. Eleanor. Glenn's voice was patient, the way someone is patient with a difficult child. We've gone over this. The neurologist has been very clear. I know. I just want to hear it one more time. Humor, an old woman. I looked up at him over the papers. You said Danny lost control on Route 9. What time was this exactly? A flicker. Fast, but I caught it. Around midnight, give or take. It was raining. The roads were wet, yes. I'm just wondering. Danny drove that route constantly. He knew every curve on it, drove it in worse weather than this. I kept my voice gentle, just a grieving aunt grasping at details. Do the police have a report yet? I'd like to read it. These things take time, Glenn said. Of course. I flipped a page of the authorization forms. I'm also a little confused about this section here. It says withdrawal of all life-sustaining intervention. Does that include the IVs? The nutrition line? Yes, Sylvia said, before Glenn could answer. Then she seemed to hear herself and softened her voice. I mean, that's typically what that language covers. It's a compassionate process, very peaceful. I looked at her. I'm sorry. I don't think I caught your title. Are you medical staff? A short pause. I'm just here for moral support. That's so kind. I looked back at the forms. Glenn, you mentioned yesterday that Danny had told you he wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines. When was that conversation? I'm asking because I was very close to my nephew and I don't recall him ever expressing that to me directly. Glenn's jaw was doing something careful. It was casual. A year or two ago, we were watching a documentary. A documentary about what? Eleanor. His voice had dropped the patience now. I understand you're struggling. This is devastating for all of us. But every hour we delay is an hour Danny is suffering on that machine. The doctors have been clear. There's no hope. Then a few more questions won't change anything, I said pleasantly. I set the forms down and folded my hands on top of them. I'd like to speak with Dr. Hafner one more time before I sign. Can you ask him to come in? What happened in Glenn's face in that moment, it wasn't grief. It was the rapid interior calculation of someone whose timeline is slipping. He's with other patients, Glenn said. Then we'll wait. I smiled at him. I'm not going anywhere. I've got nowhere to be but here with my nephew. 20 minutes is a long time in a hospital room when the air is charged the way that air was charged. Glenn checked his phone 4 times. Sylvia walked to the window and stood with her back to us. I held Danny's hand and watched the monitors and talked to my nephew quietly about nothing. About the spring. About his truck. About a recipe he'd wanted me to teach him the last time we'd shared a meal. I don't know if he heard me. I needed him to know someone was there who loved him. The door opened, and it wasn't Dr. Hafner. Dr. Renata Shaw was in her 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of focused attention that fills a room when she enters it. Camille was 2 steps behind her, and behind Camille were 2 Greystone security officers and a man in a gray jacket who showed a badge when Glenn turned around. Mr. Portfield, Dr. Shaw said, without preamble, I'm the chief of neurology at this hospital. I've just completed an independent review of your stepson's case, and I have serious concerns about his current assessment and his care. She turned to me. Ms. Voss, your nephew is not brain dead. He is in a medically induced coma that has been deepened beyond any therapeutic rationale. When we reduce his sedation to appropriate levels over the next 24 hours, I believe there is a meaningful possibility that he will regain consciousness. I cannot tell you the full extent of his recovery until he wakes, but he is not gone. I heard a sound and realized it came from me. Glenn stepped forward. This is outrageous. Dr. Hafner is currently being escorted to the administrator's office, Shaw said without raising her voice. We have documentation of irregular chart entries, unsanctioned medication changes, and a recorded image of him receiving what appears to be a cash payment in this facility this morning. She looked at Glenn with the expression of someone who has seen a great deal in her career and is not surprised. The gentleman behind Ms. Okafor is a detective with the Greystone County Sheriff's Department. The detective stepped forward. Glenn Portfield, I'm Detective Aaron Marsh. I need you to come with me, sir. You're being detained for questioning in connection with suspected criminal tampering with a patient's medical care. He looked at Sylvia. Are you Sylvia Crane? Her face went the color of paper. You'll want to come, too. Glenn said it was absurd. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he wanted his lawyer and that these people had no idea who they were dealing with. He said all of this in a voice that climbed in pitch with each sentence as the security officers moved toward him, and I sat beside my nephew's bed with my hand over his and did not look at Glenn Portfield again. I had looked at him enough. Dr. Shaw stayed after they were gone. She pulled a chair close and spoke to me directly, without the flattened language of Dr. Hafner's prognosis. She told me Danny's brain imaging showed injury consistent with his accident, but not in her assessment with the catastrophic diffuse damage Hafner had documented. She told me the nursing notes, once she had reviewed them with the charge nurse, showed 2 unauthorized increases to his sedation, both during overnight hours, both initiated when Glenn had been on the floor. She told me that Camille Okafor had done exactly what a patient advocate was supposed to do and that she intended to say so in writing to the hospital administration. "Will he wake up?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I appreciated that she didn't answer immediately. "I don't make promises in neurology," she said, "but I've seen the responses Ms. Okafor documented. I did my own assessment. Ms. Voss, your nephew is in there. He is fighting. And now we are going to let him fight with the right support instead of the wrong medication." Camille sat with me that afternoon. We didn't talk much. She brought me coffee and a sandwich from the cafeteria that I mostly didn't eat, and we sat in the room and watched Danny breathe and waited. The investigation that unfolded over the following days was worse than I had imagined, which means it was exactly as bad as my worst suspicion. Glenn and Sylvia Crane had been together for 14 months. They'd met at a financial conference long before Danny's accident. Long, it turned out, before Danny's mother had died. Glenn had been named contingent beneficiary under certain conditions in the trust documents through a clause that Danny's own attorney described to me grimly as a drafting error from years ago that no one had ever bothered to correct because it had seemed so unlikely to ever matter. If Danny died before his 32nd birthday without a will of his own, the trust's default provisions funneled assets through the estate, and Glenn's attorneys had already prepared an estate claim based on his marriage to Danny's late mother. $2.3 million. Enough, apparently, to make a man look at his stepson in a hospital bed and feel relief instead of sorrow. Glenn had approached Dr. Hafner 3 days after Danny's admission. The envelope Camille had photographed contained $12,000 in cash as a first payment, with an agreement for $40,000 more once the authorization was signed and the machines were turned off. Dr. Hafner had not needed much convincing. He had debts of his own. The falsified neurological assessment had taken him less than an hour to produce. Sylvia's role had been simpler. She was there to watch Glenn, to make sure he followed through, and because the plan had been her idea in the first place. Detective Marsh told me that detail during a follow-up interview 3 weeks later with a flatness in his voice that told me he had also stopped being surprised by people a long time ago. Danny woke on the 4th day after they reduced his sedation, not all at once. It was a slow surfacing, hours of restlessness and confused movement before his eyes opened and focused. I was there. I had barely left the hospital. When he looked at me and said my name, Aunt Ellie, rough and bewildered, I pressed his hand to my face and held it there and didn't try to speak for a long time. His recovery was not simple or fast. There were weeks of inpatient rehabilitation, then months of outpatient therapy. His left hand still trembles sometimes. His processing speed is slower than it was in ways that only people who knew him well can detect. He walks without a cane now. He drove for the first time in February and called me immediately after, laughing. Glenn Portfield was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and criminal tampering with a person's medical care. Sylvia Crane received a lesser conviction as an accessory and co-conspirator. Dr. Porpet. Hafner surrendered his medical license before the criminal proceedings concluded and pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges. He will not practice medicine again. Danny's trust was legally restructured under a new trustee, a professional firm with no connection to the Portfield family. He received it intact 11 weeks later on his 32nd birthday. We celebrated quietly. Just the two of us and Camille, who had become, improbably and permanently, part of our small family. You saved my life, Danny told her that night, meaning it in the most literal way a person can mean anything. I did my job, she said, which is what she always said, but she was smiling. You did more than your job, I said. You did the thing that was harder than your job. You did it alone, without backup, when your supervisor told you to stop. That's not procedure. That's courage. She looked down at her hands. I almost didn't. I almost talked myself out of it. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just a junior advocate who doesn't know enough yet and I'm about to blow up this man's life for nothing? What changed your mind? Danny asked. She thought about it. I went back and looked at you one more time that morning, before I went to find your aunt. I stood at the end of your bed when no one was there and I watched your face. And something in me just knew. The same way you know a room is occupied even before you see the person in it, you were in there. I knew it. Instinct. That is what this story is about, under everything else. An older woman who had spent a career learning to trust what she sensed beneath what she was told. A young woman who trusted what she saw with her own eyes over what authority insisted was true. A young man who had, 4 years ago, put his medical power of attorney in the hands of the one person he knew would fight for him. There is a version of that Thursday morning where I uncap the pen and sign my name before anyone can stop me, where I drive home through Georgia fog, telling myself I did the right thing, the kind thing, the rational thing, where Danny never wakes up and Glenn Portfield sits in the Cayman Islands with $2.3 million that belong to my brother's son, and Camille Okafor gets a formal written reprimand in her personnel file for raising concerns that nobody wanted to hear. That version almost happened. It was stopped by 10 minutes and a locked consultation room door and a young woman's hands that wouldn't stop shaking even while she held her ground. I think about that sometimes when I'm driving the Georgia roads at night. How close the world gets to going wrong. How much depends on the people who decide to be inconvenient. So tell me, has there been a moment in your life when you trusted your instincts over the easy answer? When you said something no one wanted to hear or listened to someone everyone else was dismissing? Tell me in the comments. Those stories matter. They remind the rest of us that the inconvenient choice is sometimes the only one worth making. If this story stayed with you, please share it, not for the channel, for whoever might be sitting in a waiting room right now, holding a pen, feeling something they can't quite name. Let's make sure they put the pen down. Thank you for being here with me at Twisted QVX Stories. I'll see you in the next one. And remember, the people who love you are worth the 10 minutes it takes to be sure.